All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, down there in my home area, Atlanta, Georgia. One of my favorite NBA writers, one of my favorite authors, because Shaun Powell, I read your book, read Sold Out this past month, got it in, and very much loved it, and excited to kind of maybe ask you a couple questions about that, revisiting it, because it's been a decade now since you wrote that book?
Been about 15 years now.
Yeah.
No, that's not that long. Let's see. I'm losing track. Right around there, though. About a dozen.
Yeah. Does it feel like it?
It felt like it took a dozen years to write it, even though it was more like 6 months.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why is because writing is very tedious, time-consuming, and when you write for your regular 9-to-5, and then you take on a writing project, I mean, there's a reason why I haven't written another one since. Not that I have anything against writing books. It's just that I can't write a book and do this.
Mm-hmm.
I think once I maybe stop doing this, then I'll go back to writing books.
What do you think the next book would be on if you had to do another one? What
I don't know. I approached Allen Iverson and his people about doing his autobiography. I think that would be a bestseller. But I don't know where he stands with that right now. There could be maybe another autobiography that I could probably see being written besides his, although his would be fantastic if he was honest with it in the book. And that's one thing about autobiographies. Sometimes the subject is not fully honest. He might be 75% honest, but he's worried about what his kids are going to read about him. Mm-hmm. He's worried about maybe he wants to get another job in the business, all those sort of things. And so they're kind of careful what they wrote. Sylvester Stallone said something that I thought was very, very true. He said he'll never write his autobiography because if he did, he would hurt too many people. And I believe that's absolutely true. If you're going to be honest about it, the only autobiographies that I've read that were about 85 to 90% honest was Andre Agassi's, Jerry West, and Mike Tyson's. And they kind of came completely clean.
What do you think that was? What do you think the three had in common that made them more likely to...
Well, I think Jerry West was very comfortable with who he was. His kids were grown. He probably had discussions with them and blah, blah, blah. Mike Tyson, I mean, his life was out there for so long, an open book. I'm sure he was like, well, there's very little that I could write that people already don't know. However, it was very compelling, and he really spoke from the heart. Agassi just wanted to unload on, what he went through, as a kid, tennis prodigy as a young, his father drove him, all those sorts of things. And his was very good. But the rest of them are just glossed over, vanilla, just throw it together so maybe you can make a couple bucks. And that's not how you should do it.
Why Iverson for you?
What's that?
Why Iverson? Why would Iverson?
Well, I just think that he's lived. First of all, I think that he has a sort of an iconic. He has a following, the same way Kobe had a following, the same way Jordan had a following. But the one thing I told Iverson, I said, you do have a following, but your crowd, your audience is going to grow up and move on. And you have to write that book while you still have that audience, because eventually they'll just move on and you won't have the same pizzazz. So, but I don't know. We'll see where that is.
Interesting. You have a lot about Iverson in the book. If you had to add another chapter right now in 2023, what do you think you would cover? What do you think you would add to the book?
That's a great question, because the Black athlete and society around him both have evolved since I wrote the book. Not drastically, but I mean, you saw the social unrest movement 2020, guys like LeBron James come out, things like that. So I'm sure it would probably be updated in that in that manner. But I do think the big picture, the fact that the power has not been really fully exercised, the fact that misrepresented in the highest level of sports, as in commissioner, as in the NFL, you see the coach situation, CEOs, general managers, certainly owners. I mean, those things are still there, and those things are still in, around us. And the other thing is that the whole stereotype that we've seen from black athletes. It used to be back in the 60s and 70s, to beat your chest after a 3-yard gain in the first quarter, and after you make a basket and all those things. Those things were frowned upon. I mean, it's hot. Like the worst thing that could be called is someone calling you a hot dog. It was the worst thing that someone could call you. But nowadays it's accepted. And not only is that, it's accepted among black athletes. It's like you're supposed to start dancing in the end zone and things like that. And, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm too old school in a sense. I like the Barry Sanders approach, act like you've been there before, all those sort of things. But I get it. The generation, it's a new generation. It's a new set of demands. It's basically the abolishment of sportsmanship. Sportsmanship is gone. And sportsmanship began to die the day Muhammad Ali stood over Sonny Liston in the ring and said, "Get up, sucker." Now, it took a few years after that, but that basically lit the fuse. And nowadays, it's not only just beating your opponent, it's showing him up, rubbing it in, all those sorts of things that used to be frowned upon. It's now accepted and even demanded by the public. And what I see is that black athletes all too often fall into that trap, and they feed the stereotype. And that's really what it's really all about. So that's why the book was how blacks are winning and losing in sports. Winning financially, of course. I mean, the money, ridiculous, all those, it's life-changing, generational wealth, all those sorts of things. But then there are other things that black athletes can control, and there are certain things that are beyond their control.
Yeah, and I mean, there are things like Richard Johnson wrote a really good piece highlighting just the most influential black coaches, admins, things like that at SI this week. And I didn't realize that Mike Loxley had a coalition that he formed in 2020 during COVID for minority coaches and minority admins, and just increasing that. And there's like 1,500 members or something like that. But that was something you had highlighted in the book, and that's just a big part of it. And I think stuff like that just continue to get bigger and stronger. You're going to see more and more progress, but like you said, it's still just not where we need to be, but it's progress at this point. But very much love the book, and I would highly encourage folks to go to get it. It's on Amazon. Go get it. It's a great read. Well, Shaun, Damian Lillard dropped 71 points this week, and I wanted to pick your brain about Lillard because he is such an interesting, I think, figure in sports in general, because we talk about like where certain things have gone with athletes. But one of the things that has changed in the modern athlete is just kind of like bouncing around. You don't really worry about playing from team to team, your legacy in terms of bouncing around from team to team. And a lot of guys expect to just bounce around at a certain point in their career. And Damian Lillard still is just, he kind of feels like the last man standing to this old guard. And it's paying off for him, where the 71 points, I think, meant more for Lillard and for that community in Portland, because he's just been there, and the Portland Trailblazers are not going to make the playoffs this year. They're having a rough rebuilding year. We'll see what they do this offseason, but he stuck around, and 71 points was just a lot of fun. You see how the city still just loves and enjoys watching Damian Lillard go to work and just be the best player. Really, he's on his way to being the best Portland Trailblazer ever. And being the most revered Trailblazer ever because of just his impact and staying and doing what he's done on and off the court. Where does does it change anything about you in terms of his where he ranks all time and just who he is as a player and a figure in Portland? What did you make of the legendary night and just Damian Lillard as a whole right now?
Well, I mean, it was spectacular night for two reasons. Number one, He didn't play the game before because they
Mm.
had some travel issues and everything, and he received some blowback about that, mainly social media stuff, whatever. I mean, the players read too much about what they read on social media, and it kind of psychs them up. I don't understand it, and this is a whole different rant, but why do you care what some guy in Montana thinks about? I never got that, the whole
Mm.
social media and why guys are always checking their mentions, whatever. Anyway, but he didn't play the game before, and the one thing about the 71 points, two things. Number one, he was very efficient doing so. It wasn't like he was jacking up 71 shots to get the
Mm.
71 points. Number one. Number two, he scored all that in regulation. Uh, Donovan Mitchell also broke the 70-point mark, but he needed overtime to do that. Not
Mm.
diminishing what Donovan did, but I'm just trying to put it in context with Dame. The larger context with Dame is not having a championship. Well, I mean, again, certain things are just beyond your control. I mean, you can
Mm.
play as well as you want to play, but you have to have the right coaching, the right teammates, and you got to have some luck too. Sometimes the ball's got to bounce your way. And Damian Lillard's been in the conference final once. And when he was in the conference final, they played the Golden State Warriors. That was the year Kevin Durant was injured. And Damian Lillard did not play well in that series with the Warriors. They were swept. You could argue that Myers Leonard played better than Damian Lillard. He just didn't shoot the ball very well. And again, I'm not going to hold that against him. I mean, it's such a small sample size. I mean, if
Mm.
he performed lousy in like 5 Western Conference Finals, okay, well, that's a trend.
Mm.
So that's certainly forgivable. The other thing is what he means to the Portland community. I mean, yes, he is endeared there. I mean, Damian Lillard is really, and we talked a little bit about the whole look at me type, persona you see among athletes, beating your chest. Damian Lillard doesn't do the other stuff. And you look at if you go back in that 71-point game, the celebratory gestures and all that stuff, the sticking his chin out, he just played the game. And that's what I love about him.
Mm.
He just plays the game. All the other nonsense he doesn't put up with. He's a man of high character, a man who there's a reason why he is adored in Portland because he carries himself the right way. He does a lot of things the right way. He is really what you would want in an athlete. Now, a couple other things about him. Number one, I think the world of him as a player. I just think he's just a tremendous, tremendous scorer. Works hard at his craft, works hard at his body, respects the game. I also think it's going to be hard for a 6'1", 6'2" guard who only does one thing extraordinarily well, and that's score.
Mm.
It's hard for a player like that to lead your team to a championship. You want to say there are some exceptions like Isaiah Thomas, okay, but Isaiah Thomas had a very good defensive team around him. Lambeer, Rodman, Sally, Rick Mahorn, Joe Dumars. So he had some good pieces. You want to say Steph Curry? I don't know about that. Steph Curry had KD for 2 of those titles. He caught a little bit of a break last year when half the Western Conference contenders had missing pieces, Denver, Clippers. And then Steph just played just amazing basketball. So, but other than that, it's very hard for, Dame he's not grabbing a bunch of rebounds. He's a good passer, he's not Stockton. And he is not going to impact the basketball game at the other end defensively. Look, I'm not trying to diminish him. He's named to the 75 greatest players ever. So that's ultimate respect. The other thing is he has a max contract. The guy's making $50 and $60 million a year. I have not that much sympathy for human beings who's pulling down that kind of dough. He's doing well for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if he really wants sympathy. I don't know. But again, he is my idea of a basketball player in terms of how he carries himself and in terms of how he respects the game. He has his limitations, as 95% of all basketball players do. They all have limitations. And he's done as well as he could in Portland.
Is there a part of you, though, that wants to see him go somewhere else just to see it at the end, just to see him contend? Are you okay with it?
No, I mean, is championships everything? I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Charles Barkley never won one. Patrick Ewing never won one. I mean, I can go on and on. So many great players Elgin Baylor arguably didn't win one. I know he was with the Lakers last year in 1972 when they did win a championship, but he retired before the season started. So, I mean, again, I don't know. I'm not a full-fledged member of the championship or bust crowd. I don't necessarily think that reflects tremendously poorly on you. I just think that you just have to give yourself as many cracks at it as you can. Only one team's going to win. And sometimes you're trapped. You're at the mercy of a great player's dynasty. Like look at Karl Malone, John Stockton, denied during Michael Jordan's era. Patrick Ewing, denied during Michael Jordan's era. Charles Barkley, denied during Michael Jordan's era. How many teams and players have been denied during the Steph Curry Warriors era? Sometimes it's just like that. I mean, is there the human side of me that would like to see him win one in Portland? Of course. But at the same time, is he any more deserving of a championship than, I don't know, Jason Tatum, Chris Paul? I mean, I can go on and on about players who haven't won a championship. Is he more deserving of them? I don't know. I mean, you do the best you can and let the chips fall as they may.
Do you think because we've seen 2 71-point games this year, we're going to start to be desensitized to 70-point games just with the way basketball is played sooner rather than later?
Well, I think it was several years ago when the NBA put in some rule changes to stimulate scoring because, you have the Miami Heat playing the New York Knicks and the score was 75-70. And I think, fans wanted to see a more open floor, open court, everything. And I think it was a case of be careful what you wish for because nowadays everybody just jacks up 3-point shots. The floor is spread. Everybody goes one-on-one. There's no creative play calling by coaches. Basically, just give the ball to your best player and let them go one-on-one. And we've seen the scores just, go crazy. I mean, what was it? The Clippers played the Sacramento Kings in double overtime game. They both scored 170 point, whatever it was. And I think maybe some things need to happen to get that pendulum swung in the other direction. Not obviously, you don't want to go back to 75-point games, but I think there should be a happy medium where teams and players are allowed to play defense. You saw the outcry at the All-Star game when nobody played defense. Well, it wasn't all that much different than the regular season game that we've seen in the NBA. I mean, score-wise and just effort-wise, are the players much more talented now offensively? Absolutely. But I also think the rule changes allow that to happen a little bit. You can't even get physical in the NBA at all. You can't breathe on someone. You can't touch someone. The floor is spread too wide. There's so much of an over-reliance on the 3-point shot. There's got to be a way to bring it a little bit back toward the center where, the scores are a little bit down, and whenever you score 50 points, it's special. It's not so special anymore.
Is there a way to fix the All-Star game? Like, I saw the money aspect, and I'm like, I don't think that does anything. They don't need 5 million more reasons to give more effort. I don't think that's the way to fix it. I think once you've lost it, the competitive edge is just gone, right? I don't think you can just force someone to care about it once you kind of have seen how it is. And, like, outside of letting it decide home court advantage in the NBA Finals or something, which baseball tried to do a few years back, and that did not go well. I think that ship's kind of sailed. Do you?
Yeah, I kind of do. I mean, it's, you're asking pros to, put forth, I don't know, playoff effort. Nah, that's not going to happen. Guys are not going to play that hard. And I don't really, I mean, throwing money at them, you're talking about if you make the All-Star team, chances are you're making a lot of money. So what's the extra million going to, I mean, not million, whatever it is, what's that really going to mean? You're still not going to probably put your body on the line and things like that. And to be honest with you, I think there are teams that don't want their player playing hard in the All-Star game. I mean, they want their player to leave that game the way they entered the game. And because the playoffs are so much more important. I think that the All-Star game changed, and this really feeds into load management as well. Once players started making enormous amounts of money, because the teams had so much invested in them financially, that any little sign of discomfort in their body and everything. That's why they've empowered the medical staffs and the training staff to basically be more powerful than the coaching staff. The coaches aren't the people responsible for sitting players. And that's up to the performance staff. They're responsible for telling the coach, hey, so-and-so is not playing today. And the coach says, hey, he's not playing today. So, and teams have empowered those divisions and elevated them to a point where they have all the muscle. So getting back to the All-Star game, I don't necessarily feel that it's going to change all that much. I think, but you have to also ask yourself, do fans really want players flying around the floor, injuring themselves? I don't know. I think the first time a player is seriously injured in the All-Star game, you will hear the counter argument. Well, he's been playing hard, and he's playing for my team, and all that. So I think you have to look at the All-Star game for what it is. It's just an extra. And I think if you keep it in that context and not look at it as, it's this sort of, all the chips are on the table and they're playing for something. No, they're not playing for anything. It's just an exhibition. And if you keep it in that context, then you won't go away from that game disappointed.
Yeah, I would agree. The Knicks, they blew out the Celtics this week. They're clicking on all cylinders. Shaun, I'm curious, are you surprised in the success and just the successful partnership to this point between Brunson and the Knicks and this youth movement and Julius Randle having a nice bounce back year? Are you surprised to see it just all click the way it is? I mean, this team still could end up with a 5 seed, maybe even a 4 seed by season's end. Like, I don't know. Did you see this particular scenario playing out before the year when you were looking at just what the Knicks did this offseason and where they could realistically be?
I wasn't sure how Jalen Brunson would play once he had his own team. It's simply unproven. I mean, he was at Luka Doncic, and he was sort of like riding shotgun there, and it was Luka's team. Luka had the ball mostly. Brunson was just sort of like a nice role player, secondary player to have. And so I wasn't sure. Nobody was sure until he got his own team to run. So, I mean, from that standpoint, it's been a pleasant surprise, I guess, only because he was unproven in that situation. I think what's most important about the Knicks and Brunson and what you see now is that Brunson has the ball and Julius Randle doesn't. And last year, Julius Randle had the ball. And Julius Randle is not a point guard. He makes mistakes. He takes the wrong shots sometimes. He makes the wrong pass. Just the decision-making process was removed from him for the betterment of him. Because last year he was booed by Knicks fans. Now that he gets a point guard who suddenly has the ball, Julius Randle is more of a finisher. And look what we've seen. All of a sudden there are cheers and he's back in the All-Star game again. So I think it's helped Julius Randle. He doesn't have that burden of trying to create from the perimeter, which he was, for the most part, disastrous at doing. And Jalen Brunson is a guy who's, look, you can't teach someone to be a point guard. Point guards are born, just the way they able to see the floor, see the play developing, knowing when to pass, who to pass it to, all those sort of things you really can't teach. I mean, it's just really within them. So here's a guy who has all those values, and he has the ball and he's played well. The other thing is, not only has he played well, but he's played well in clutch situations. That clutch situations are defined as the last 5 minutes of a game, of a tight game. And he leads the all NBA players in clutch 3-point shots. And I never thought of him as a big time shooter. I didn't see a lot of that at Villanova. And you saw a little bit with the Mavericks, but not tremendously. So he's played very well. He's been very steady. And then the other players have just sort of fallen in line. However, having said all this about the Knicks, they're not up with the Bucks and the Celtics and the Sixers. They're not that good. So they're not, even the Cavaliers, they're not title contending team. And I often wonder what Utah wanted from the Knicks for Donovan Mitchell. Because if you say they wanted RJ Barrett, maybe Grimes and a couple first round picks, I would have done that deal. I mean, RJ Barrett is a good player. Grimes is a nice little role player, and picks, whatever. Picks don't mean anything if I'm winning. I would have taken Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell's a star, and they're hard to find. They're hard to find. RJ Barrett's not going to be a star. He's a good player. He's not going to be a star. And they're hard to find. If you had RJ Barrett, you had Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, you had Mitchell Robinson, and throw in some other players quickly. I don't know, man. I think that's a better team. I would have a little bit more of an upside for that team than I would this current team. This current team needs a knockdown. It still needs a shooter. And I think they could use maybe a better low post presence offensively, at least, than Mitchell Robinson. And I think they could use a wing defender. So Donovan Mitchell, I think, would have been very good with this team. He wanted to be in New York. He's from the New York area. That would have been a dynamic backcourt for the next several years. But for whatever reason, they didn't pull the trigger on the trade. I mean, it hasn't been a disaster, but you're still wondering what could have been.
Yeah. And Brunson, I think, by all accounts, I mean, he's played like an all-star all year long. So early returns there are still positive if you're in the Knicks. Yeah. And you haven't mortgaged the future. Like Brunson, you just got out of free agency, so you were able to keep a lot of those young pieces that you would have had to give up in a Mitchell deal. And he's, like you said, a star, but I am curious. And speaking of the Cavs, I'm more of a believer in the Cavs than the Sixers come playoff time. I think the Cavs just get overlooked a little bit. I think they're third in net ranking right now, top 10 defense, top 10 offense. Like, they're deep. I think they deserve a lot more credit for just how good they are under JB Bickerstaff this year. But the last thing on the Knicks, though, does it feel like, I mean, you saw Zion very buddy-buddy with a lot of those Knicks players. He's missed 60% of his games now to this point in his NBA career. You see when he plays that it's such a tough conversation. Like, I don't think there's a more unenviable position to be in the NBA than what David Griffin is facing over the next year or so, because you've seen the best, right? Like when Zion was playing this year, the Pelicans were a top 10 team in the league. They looked like title contenders. Like they were a top 3, top 4 seed in the West, and then anything can happen. When Zion's healthy, he's walking into 27, 10, and 10 with an unreal shooting percentage. You can't do anything with him inside. The defense is an issue. Seems like the weight's an issue, but I don't know what you do. And then if you're the Knicks, is that who you're waiting on? Where you're just like, we're going to sit this one out for a little bit. We didn't mortgage all of our picks and everything else for Donovan, but we still think the Zion stuff is going to come to a head at a certain point. Because like, how do you build a team if you're David Griffin in New Orleans when you're just never going to be 100% certain you're going to have this guy for the stretch run? Because if you're not, what are you doing? What is the point of all of this? I feel bad for him because it's a crappy situation to be in at the moment.
Well, I mean, when Zion was healthy, the Pelicans, I believe right around December 30th, they were tied for first in the West.
Yeah.
So again, if I'm David Griffin, I'm sitting pretty, actually. I'm just sitting back. I mean, the fans in New Orleans aren't overly demanding. They understand. Obviously, I think they're frustrated with Zion's health or bad luck with that regard or whatever it might be. I mean, sometimes, injuries are preventable and sometimes they're not, I do think that the reason why if I'm David Griffin and I'm sitting pretty is, number one, I have the Lakers unprotected number 1 pick this summer. And we all know the stakes there. And we all saw what happened at LeBron James. He's going to be out. Anthony Davis might even miss more games. You know how he is. He's going to miss games. Lakers may not make the playoffs. And while they're not going to have the highest percentage of getting that number 1 pick, you never know. So, and I also own future picks from the Milwaukee Bucks from Drew Holiday. I think they owe 1 more, I think, from him. So, I mean, and you've got a lot of young players. So, a lot of it depends on Zion and his health. And yeah, suddenly, after the last few years, that's a question. You would like to think that the worst is over, but we don't know. He might be just one of those players. But I just think, if you're the Pelicans, you just sit tight and hope for the best. Get through this year. Wait till he comes back, which might be another couple weeks. Hopefully you can avoid the play-in situation, but that won't be easy. You might be back in the play-in situation like you were last year. But look how you played in the play-in situation last year when you didn't have Zion. You went toe-to-toe with the Phoenix Suns, and it was a very exciting series. I'm right. They won the play-in, and then they went toe-to-toe with the Phoenix Suns. So, as I said, there aren't that many great demands on them yet. But I just really want to wait to see Zion play in a fair amount of games and then see what happens with that team. Like I said, December 30th, approaching the new calendar year, they were tied for first place in the West, and he was healthy. So what does that say?
That's the thing. It's like you've seen the best of both, and I would just be so frustrated because I'm like, are we the best team in the West when totally healthy, or are we just never going to get that? And I'm just going to be playing for the play-in year over year because we can't get 70 games out of Zion any given year. Last thing, the Hawks. They hired Quin Snyder this week, and he jumps right in. It's kind of a weird situation all across the board. You see this a lot more in hockey. Hockey seems to do this when they do a midseason firing. A new coach does get brought in and starts right away. I'm surprised it honestly doesn't happen more in sports, professional sports across the league, because you get, for Quin Snyder, you get 20 games of just evaluating what you have going into the offseason. Like the Hawks aren't winning the NBA Finals. They're not getting out of the East, but you get 20 games to build relationships, to see what kind of lineups work, what kind of lineups don't. You have more insight into where things are headed and where guys stand. And I just feel like there's so many more pros to doing this model. The other, and I understand like it is kind of awkward with the staff because that's not it's not his guys. Who knows who will be on staff with Quin next year and who won't and that sort of thing. But by and large, I think it's a net positive. But for you, when you look at Quin being brought in, former assistant with that legendary staff under Mike Budenholzer several years ago now, but do you like the hire? Do you see this partnership working and him being able to salvage a big next year? Because DeJounte Murray is not locked up long term, and you gave up so much for DeJounte. You've got to make this work with him and Trae, and you've got to make you got to turn Onyeka Okongwu into a much bigger player to this point in his NBA career. You have to hope that DeAndre Hunter stays healthy. You got to keep developing AJ Griffin, who I love as a player. But when you look at the hire and where the Hawks are going, are you optimistic, or are you still kind of wait and see? Maybe just like I don't know. I don't have a gut feeling that Trae and DeJounte are ever going to work all that well together.
Well, just talking about Quin Snyder, I think the Hawks needed him more than he needed them. If you're Quin Snyder, I mean, you could have just sat back, wait for the summer, see which team won the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. Say it was the Houston Rockets. Maybe they have a coaching vacancy, and bam, you're coaching Victor Wembanyama. You could have probably waited for maybe, quote unquote, more attractive jobs. But so that's why I think the Hawks, I mean, they jumped on. They really didn't even interview anybody else because he's a proven coach. He's coached superstars before in Utah. He's been around stars as an assistant coach. Came up through the Popovich system in San Antonio. Obviously, a former assistant coach with the Hawks when they had Al Horford and Joe Johnson and Josh Smith. So anyway, so he knows the turf. And so I thought that it was the best coach that they could find right now, and probably would have been, even if they had waited till summer, he would have been their best choice as well. So why not get him? And it does give him time to assess the situation. Obviously, it comes down to two players, DeJounte Murray, who you said can walk, although I'm not as worried about that because the Hawks can pay him more than anybody else. And, that basically begins and ends right there. Unless DeJounte Murray does not like playing next to Trae Young, and he's never indicated anything like that. I think, like most players, he's going to go where the money is. You can always take the money, in a couple of years demand a trade. So
true,
you take the money. I mean, that's the first rule of thumb: take the money. And then with Trae Young, I think that look, he's going to mature as a player. You would like to think he's going to mature as a person. he knows that there's a bullseye on his back with regards to having so many coaches now. And I don't know to what degree he factored into those coaches' departures, the last two coaches, but probably a certain amount. And I think that Quin Snyder will be the beneficiary of that, of a more mature Trae Young. But again, it's one of those situations we'll have to wait and see. The Hawks sacrifice a bit of their future in getting DeJounte Murray. And if he walks, which I don't think he will do, then they have nothing to show for it. The other thing with the Hawks is they have to decide whether or not they want to be a luxury tax team. If I'm an owner of a franchise, I don't mind being a luxury tax team if I'm one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the NBA. I do mind being a luxury tax team if I'm struggling to make the playoffs. And right now the Hawks are struggling to make the playoffs.
Well, that was the thing is like they traded Kevin Huerter to get under that. Like that was one of those weird off seasons where, and this was like, I'm a Hawks guy. So that troubled me okay, if you really want to do this and you really are serious about competing with the Celtics and the Bucks and you look at the Bucks luxury tax bill, you're like, look, there's a path. And if you want to get back to the Eastern Conference Finals, Kevin Huerter cannot just be moved for Justin Holiday, who was just not good at all, could not shoot, and was out of the lineup 12 games in. Great locker room guy and loved the Holidays, but just it was not going to work. He should not have been playing. And Mo Harkless, who was immediately waived. And you're like, Kevin Huerter is just playing fantastic basketball in Sacramento. He and Trae had a good connection, and you moved on for nothing, and you didn't replace him, and he's just gone. And you also have this win now move of giving up more depth and trading multiple picks to bring in DeJounte Murray. So it's like, why would you trade for DeJounte and not keep Kevin Huerter? Why would you not just keep this nucleus together? Why really going all out and seeing what a big tax bill team looks like? Because I mean, we've seen this team made an Eastern Conference Final run with a worse roster and worse collection of guys, top end guys, than what they had coming into this year. Like I came into this year where it's like I thought it was fair to expect a top 4 seed. Still, with everybody being healthy, that this is enough talent in the East. They should compete to where about the Cavs are right now. Like that, I think would have been fair to expect to be right at where the Cavs are with Trae, DeAndre, DJ, John Collins, and Capella. And they just haven't been anywhere near it. And they've been a league average ball club all year long. But they also just have never had their 8 guys healthy over the last 2 years. I think that's something that people miss. As someone who watches every one of these games, they don't have their dudes. John Collins, his finger's never been right since that injury. His shot's been like 27% all year. Capella's been in and out of the lineup. Onyeka's missed some time. DeAndre always misses some time. Bogey missed some time. It's just they've never had that group. But when you look at the lineups with that group, they're really, really good. When they are all healthy, they're good. So I still think there's reason for optimism. And I think Quin in Utah showcased he completely understands modern pick and roll basketball. And that Gobert, Donovan Mitchell pick and roll is something that he could flourish with Capella, Onyeka, and Trae and DJ. Like I think that at the very least is going to be a big uptick in just what they're able to do on that front and have more of a strong identity, because a lot of it was just here's DJ's turn, here's Trae's turn, here's DJ's turn. And I don't think we'll see as much of that. So I think that's enough room for optimism and just fingers crossed on health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've read the situation right. I think the Hawks will be right there in the playoff, at least a play-in situation. The East is top heavy, but in the middle, it's just whatever. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of Quin on his team last 20 games.
They need and I tell folks, I'm like, I was on a podcast yesterday and I was like, the thing that you want if you're a Hawks fan is you want Sixers Hawks in round 1. The Sixers want no part of a 6-seed Hawks who are healthy in round 1. I would take the Hawks in that series. Like just the mind games, and you give Trae Philadelphia in round 1. I mean, the NBA would want that. That is just an all-time, because like they're getting stomped by the Bucks or the Celtics if they get them in round 1. So if you can get up to 6, then we're really cooking with something, Shaun. Then we're like, okay, I'm all the way back in. I'm a modern skyhawk around my house here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Well, Shaun, what can the good folks check out from you over at NBA.com or anywhere else this week?
Just taking on the Warriors and whether or not their glass is half empty or half full. Also next Tuesday, Pau Gasol will have his jersey retired by the Lakers.
Hmm.
And I had a chance to speak with him during the All-Star break. So I'm looking forward to writing those couple stories coming up in the next couple days.
Do you think he gets it retired by Memphis too, or no?
That's a little tough. I think when I'm thinking Memphis Grizzlies, I'm thinking the grit and grind era. There will be a Gasol up in the rafters, but it won't be Powell.
We'll leave it there. I love that.
It'll be Marc Gasol.
What is he even doing now? He fell off a cliff. Like, what is Marc Gasol? He's just living his best
Oh, he's
life.
playing overseas in Spain.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I like it. Shaun Powell, always great checking in and talking hoops with you. I appreciate it. Have yourself a great rest of your day, a great week, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me, my man, Chase. We'll see you, man.
See ya.